Tonight, we remember former First Lady Eleanor Rosalynn Smith Carter. As you may have heard just a few minutes ago, right here on NBC, she passed away this afternoon shortly after 2 o'clock. According to the Carter Center, she entered hospice care on Friday after a months-long battle with dementia. Mrs. Carter was 96 years old. She was a champion of mental health, caregiving, and women's rights. Born August 18, 1927, she was married to Jimmy Carter, the 39th President of the United States, for 77 years. They had 4 children, Jack, Chip, Jeff, and Amy, and 11 grandchildren and 14 great-grandchildren. A grandson died in 2015. Rosalynn Carter wore many hats: wife, mother, partner, and advocate. She dedicated much of her life to improving the lives of those around her in her home state here of Georgia and beyond. Along with her husband, Mrs. Carter traveled the world shedding light on issues such as human rights, caregiving, and childhood health. 11 Alive's John Sherrick has more on her remarkable legacy.
Her life, the American dream come true.
Well, Jim and I have had great opportunities.
Her heart full of gratitude all her life.
The American people have given us unlimited chances, unlimited opportunities, and make it possible for us to do things that we never would ever have been able to do.
And what Rosalynn Carter did with her life and with her life partner and husband was change lives.
So help me God. So help me God.
49 years old when she entered the national stage in 1976, when Jimmy Carter was elected president, Rosalynn Carter knew going in that as First Lady she would be not only the soft-spoken supporter of her husband.
There's no way that we would be here tonight with Jimmy president without your help. We love and care for every single one of you.
Rosalynn Carter would also redefine the role of First Lady, advancing her relentless drive to pursue an independent agenda, her causes.
Es un gran placer para mí estar aquí.
Jimmy would declare that Rosalynn was the only politician in the family, and he meant it. Her unmatched ferocity to win, cloaked in her gracious Southern charms, earning her the nickname, the Steel Magnolia.
For too long, these people have not received the care they need.
And she went to war for her signature cause, begun years earlier as Georgia's First Lady.
We do have some specific recommendations.
The fight to revolutionize mental health care and healing.
Realize that it's just an illness like any other illness.
Rosalynn Carter's American dream began on August 18, 1927. Born Eleanor Rosalynn Smith in Plains, 130 miles south of Atlanta. When Rosalynn was 13, her father died, and she had to take charge of the family so her mother could get a job outside the home. Rosalynn managed all of that and still graduated from high school and college. And a month before her 19th birthday, she and Jimmy married. They had 3 sons, and 15 years after number 3, they had a daughter. And all those years and beyond, Rosalynn was a full partner with Jimmy in business and in local and state and then national politics. And after the White House, she and Jimmy co-founded the Carter Center in Atlanta, focusing on helping the weakest, the poorest, the sickest.
We know that mental illness is a disease as any other.
And helping achieve a monumental shift in health insurance. So now it covers mental illnesses just as it does physical illnesses.
And almost everyone suffering from mental illness can be helped.
This is a woman who began a joyous love affair with fly fishing relatively late in life, who enjoyed a glass of wine and laughter with her friends and expanding family, a night owl to Jimmy the early bird, working full-time into her 90s. The girl from Plains who grew up making opportunities for others around the world.
My dream for the future would be peace in the world and freedom from sickness. The best thing we could do is work toward that goal.
Rosalynn Carter, the American dream come true.
Many know Rosalynn Carter as the former First Lady of the White House, the wife of President Jimmy Carter. But how many people know Rosalynn Carter, champion for mental health research? Earlier this year, with Mrs. Carter battling dementia, Christy Diaz explored that part of her life, speaking with those who know it best.
In the small town of Americus, only 10 miles down the road from the famous hometown of Jimmy and Rosalynn Carter, sits an organization named after the former First Lady. Its mission is to help a population close to Mrs. Carter's heart.
You know, I say our job is not to make caregiving easy. Our job is to make caregiving less hard.
Dr. Jennifer Olson is the CEO of the Rosalynn Carter Institute for Caregivers. She says both the Carters stayed intimately involved from the day she interviewed for the job in 2018.
The first thing that struck me was Mrs. Carter came to the door with my resume in her hand with highlights and notes on it. And President Carter came into the room and said, "Yeah, shouldn't you go work at the Carter Center?" And I then took that as my opportunity to convince both of them and make the case that caregiving is a public health issue.
The Institute was created in 1987, but the seed to help was planted more than 20 years earlier when Mr. Carter was running for governor, and Mrs. Carter kept getting the same question about mental health.
But what's the president going to do? What's the president going to do? So she decided to get herself into the line, the meet and greet line for the president, reach out to shake his hand and ask him what he's going to do about mental health.
Well, he reached for my hand before he knew who I was. And he said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "I want to know what you're going to do for people with mental illnesses when you're governor of Georgia."
Reportedly, didn't he say something like, "I'm going to put you in charge of it"?
That's right, that's right.
And he did. From the governor's mansion to the White House, Mrs. Carter led commissions, testified before the Senate, and wrote books on the issue, while his wife provided the face and voice for the mission.
We've heard about the lack of adequate service or the wrong kinds of services.
The former president became a quiet ally, relishing the role of supportive husband to tackle the issue together.
President Carter donated part of his Nobel Prize winnings to the Institute back 20 years ago. So, I mean, this hasn't just been a recent effort, it's been a long-standing level of support.
For nearly 4 decades, the Rosalynn Carter Institute has been a quiet disruptor, influencing policy, forging partnerships, and doling out resources to those who need it most.
Her vision of a more caring society. Do you think we're there yet? Slowly.
Our website is most popular in the late night hours or the early morning hours when a caregiver is reaching their crisis point.
About 133 million Americans, nearly half the population, suffers from at least one chronic illness. That's 15 million higher than a decade ago, forcing 1 in 5 adults into an active caregiving role.
We know caregivers experience especially mental health challenges at higher rates than their non-caregiving peers.
Even in their 90s, when Mrs. Carter stepped into a caregiving role once again, Dr. Olson says the Carters were still intimately involved. Their next big goal is to create an Office of the Caregiver inside the Department of Health and Human Services.
Right now, there are very few, if any, federal employees who even have the word caregiver in their job title. That just doesn't make sense to us.
Sometimes the obvious thing is where the Carters thrived, turning common sense humanity into a lifelong mission and a legacy to be continued.
I think there's just a commitment to whatever cause they have put their name to for it to move forward, and you as a participant in that just feel like you've got to keep it going.
Right now on 11alive.com, we have much more on the life of Mrs. Carter, all of her accomplishments and what was such a rich and active life, including a link to the tribute site set up from the Carter Center. And when the Carter Center announces information on services for Mrs. Carter, we will pass those details along. We have much more ahead tonight on the news at 6 and on our website, 11alive.com.